tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today we'll be continuing with the lesson about explaining what the Paramattha Dhammas are. Up to now, we have discussed the basic characteristics the Paramattha Dhammas possess and why certain things are called Paramattha Dhammas. Then we started to enumerate or to elaborate the list of the realities in brief, so the listeners could have grabbed the meaning more clearly. So last week we discussed about the akusala chetasikas and the akusala chittas. I think yesterday I was able to distribute 2 handouts. I think Seali Punyachari will share this handout in the Zoom chat box. So anyone who couldn't have it, who's not in the fundamentals Viber group, could have it by now. And also she will share it in another 15 minutes. So then the ones who come a bit later could also get it. So in the handout, there are the 2 handouts were given. One handout is about the Paramattha Dhammas, the realities, the things that we have discussed so far. I was able to complete the part of the Paramattha Dhammas. The remaining parts will be distributed in future. And then second handout is a list of the Paramattha Dhammas that the Theravadians consider as realities. So if you go to the handout, the first page, second handout, the list of Paramattha Dhammas according to the Theravada tradition. The list of Paramattha Dhammas according to the Theravada tradition. So there are 3 types of Sankata Paramattha Dhammas mentioned in the tradition. So Chitta, we normally consider it as the focus. That's how we express the term in this class. And it has been explained. And we also mentioned there are 89 types of varieties in this one type of focus. Though we explain it as a one intrinsic nature, a single intrinsic nature, in the Theravada tradition, it has been explained in 89-fold and sometimes 121-fold. So in this list, we are only discussing about the 89 types of chittas. 89 and 121 are identical. There's no difference in the essence. So how the Lokuttara chittas are counted. In the 89 classification, we count only 8 Lokuttara chittas, while in the 121 classification, we take it to be 40. So then, so far we have discussed. Now, the chitta, if you go in below the list, so chittas are, I have given all the names of all the 89 chittas, so the listeners could go through them at their leisure. I'll be explaining them one after another in brief. Then if you go into page number 6, we find the Chetasikas. The first 5 pages are dedicated to the Chitta, the names of the Chittas. Then number 6, we have Chetasikas. Chetasikas are divided into 3 groups. 13 Anya Samana. Anya Samana is translated as ethically variable mental factors. Ethically variable because they can be found together with all akusala and beautiful mental factors. We didn't discuss, we just skipped them. We'll be discussing them in the next week. Then last week we discussed about the 14 akusala chetasikas. Actually, our discussion was very, very brief. Just the translation and a very basic meaning was given. So then after describing the 14 akusala chetasikas, we mentioned the chittas which associate these 14 akusala chetasikas are called akusala chittas. In a brief, just in a moment, we'll be seeing the diagram of the chittas, how they are, how the chittas are divided. The 89 chittas are divided. So the chittas which associate these 14 chetasikas, akusala chetasikas, unwholesome mental factors, the chittas which associate them are called akusala chittas. I think we try to understand the difference between the chetasika and chittas last week. Chitta is the focus itself. Chetasikas are the mental states that associate this focus. So these, if any chitta is associated by any of these unwholesome mental factors, that chitta is called akusala chitta. If we go back to if we go back in the handout to the first page, if you go to the first page, under the chitta, we find that in the third subtopic, there are 12 akusala chittas. 12 akusala chittas are threefold, as lobha mula, dosa mula, moha mula. So all these 12 akusala chittas have at least few of the akusala chetasikas. So akusala chetasikas are mental factors. Akusala chittas are the focus or the mental consciousness that are associated with these akusala chetasikas. So we should be able to distinguish this difference when we are studying the Theravada teachings. Then we go back to the page number 7. We go back to page number 7. In the Chetasika group, there are the third group of Chetasikas. We call them the Sobhana Chetasikas. Sobhana Chetasikas. Sobhana Chetasikas are 25 in the number. 25 in the number. Today we are going to discuss about them. So the chittas which associate akusala chetasikas were called akusala chittas. Then the chittas which associate these sobhana chetasikas are called sobhana chittas. We can see the similarity. If a chitta associates akusala chetasikas, that chitta is called akusala chitta. If any chitta associates sobhana chetasikas, that chitta is called sobhana chitta. But when you go through the list of the chittas in this handout, you will not see any particular chitta called sobhana chittas. Now we'll be explaining that in the board, what are the sobhana chittas out of these 89. Then in the page number 8, we find the rupa. Rupa is mainly twofold, 4 great elements and the derived elements. We call them Mahabhuta and Upadaya Rupa. Mahabhuta and Upadaya. 4 and 14. Why normally the derived matter is 24? Why did it became 14? Because we have taken out the Anippanna Rupas. That are the Rupa that are not concretely produced by any of the 4 factors. So normally when you study the Theravada Abhidhamma, we study about 28 types of Rupas, but here we have given only 18 Rupas, excluding the last 10, which are not ultimate realities according to the tradition. So this is the brief introduction about the handout. So today we will be going to page number 7. Page number 7. We have 25 Sobhana Chetasikas, beautiful mental factors. So the chittas which associate these beautiful mental factors are called beautiful consciousness, Sobhana Chittas. Sobhana Chittas. Then I think it's easier if we can enumerate what are the Sobhana Chittas in the first place. For that, we'll go to the first page. In the first page, we have mentioned Chitta is fourfold. Kamavachara, Rupavachara, Arupavachara, and Lokutra. Kamavachara, Rupavachara, Arupavachara, and Lokutra. We'll have a brief explanation about them in a future lecture. What are these Kamavachara, Rupavachara, Arupavachara, and so forth. So today we are going to find out what are the chittas which associate these sobana mental factors, sobana chetasikas. For that, we should first enumerate the chittas. Chittas is divided mainly into 4 groups. Kamavachara, we have 54. Rupavachara, 15. These are jhana chittas actually. These are jhanas. Arupavachara, 12. It's a higher type of a jhana. This is the jhana which have a mostly associated with the rupa, or which leads to a Rupavachara Brahma realm. This jhana is disassociated with rupa and it leads to a life without the matter. Then we come to another chitta called Lokuttara chittas. They are 8 in number. Normally the chittas are 89. 89. Then we come into chetasikas, mental factors, 52. So they are threefold as Anya Samana, ethically variable. So we have 13, which we didn't discuss yet. Then Akusala, which are 14. Then Sobana, 25. So these are the groups of chittas and the group of chetasikas. The very basic understanding should be chitta is one thing, chetasika is a different thing. Though they arise together, they are completely different realities. That understanding, distinguishing these two realities as two different entities or two different particulars is very vital in understanding the teachings. Then these 54, if you go to the page number 1 of the handout, now these are the first classification: 54, 15, 12, and 8. So don't worry about the numbers much. The the important fact is chitta has been explained as fourfold. What is the basis for this classification? We shall discuss it later. Then these 54 Kamavachara chittas are again threefold. As if you go to the second category, Akusala chittas, 12. Then we have Ahetuka, 18. And Kama Sobana, 24. Don't worry about the numbers much, right? So this is how the Kamavachara chittas has been classified. Right? So Akusala, Ahetuka, Kama Sobana. Akusala means unwholesome. So far we have discussed, if any chitta associates any of the akusalas, that chitta is called Akusala chitta. We saw a difference in that. We saw a similarity in their association. Right? And the next thing is these Akusala chittas never associate these Sobana chetasikas. They never associate with each other. It means because they can never come together. But we also mentioned that Anya Samana and Akusala can stay together. Sobana and Anya Samana can stay together. And sometimes they stay alone even without the association of Akusala or Sobana chetasikas. That also we mentioned last time. Sometimes there are chittas which only have these types of chetasikas, ethically variable, like the very basic. We categorize them as the very basic qualities of cognition, basic mental qualities of cognition, such as feeling, perception, recognition, the focus, the one-pointedness. So these are the very basic. We cannot distinguish them as either as Akusala or as Sobana. But so they can associate akusala and sobana both at different times. That's why they were called ethically variable, because ethically these akusalas are considered as low. Ethically they have a low value. Sobanas are considered supreme in the ethical sense. But these anya samanas sometimes, now for instance, the effort. So we can sometimes have effort for stealing. It can be associated with akusala. Effort for meditation. At that time, this effort, the basic fact of cognition, one of the basic characteristics of cognition, are associated with sobana mental factors. So next week, we are going to discuss what are these very basic factors of cognition. So far, we discussed about the akusalas. Then, yeah. So today we are going to discuss about the 24 sobana chetasika. So what are the chittas which associate these sobana chetasikas? So in the list, the Kamavachara group, Kamavachara belong into the sense sphere, sensual sphere. Rupa Vachara, Arupa Vachara, Lokuttara are spiritually higher attainments. With high concentration, you can attain into these chittas. With insight meditation, we attain into the supra-mundane level of becoming a noble being, Sotapanna, Sakadagami, and so forth. So we'll discuss them later. What are these chittas? So now, sobana, 25 sobana chetasikas. Any chitta which associate any of these 25 chetasikas were called sobana chittas. Any of the chittas which associate the 14 akusala chetasikas were called akusala chittas. So the chittas which associate the sobana chetasikas are all these spiritual attainments are considered as sobana for sure. Spirituality means development of good ethical qualities. So they are the we can call they are the paramount position in our spirituality. One comes into a very high concentration, comes into a supreme wisdom, and then when we come into our normal, like these are spiritual attainments. In our day-to-day life, sometimes we do possess certain good qualities, such as having a good virtue, having restrainment from evil deeds. So these kinds of good thought, good behaviors can be found even in the beings who have not advanced in the spirituality, who are not advanced, who have not reached higher heights in spirituality. So therefore, in the sense sphere, so these are the ordinary chittas, these are the spiritually higher chittas. In the ordinary chittas, obviously there are akusalas, and there is a chitta called ahetukas, which we will be discussing next week. What are these chittas? Then we have some kind of good type of chittas, but they are not in the standard of these high spiritual attainments. So therefore, the chetasikas, these 25 chetasikas are surely associated in these chittas. In the Kamavachara realm, they associate up to here. Up to here. So these chittas are as not all the sense sphere chittas. That's why we had to divide it into 3 groups. So these chittas are associating sobana chetasikas. Right? So therefore, we call them collectively. We can give them a name. We give them a name. Sobana chittas. Why are they called sobana chittas? Because they associate sobana chetasikas. Then, just to complete this picture, now I think you can guess. We mentioned chittas which associate akusala chetasikas are called akusala chittas. Chittas which associate the sobana chetasika are called sobana chittas. What we are left with is these anya samana chittas. They are we recognize them as the very basic characteristics, mental traits of cognition. the very basic level of cognition, Anya Samana. If you go to have a some sort of idea about what are these Anya Samana, very basic characteristics of cognition, please go to page number 6. Please go to page number 6. We find 13 Anya Samana Cetasikas. So one is Passa, the contact, Vedana, the feeling or the sensation, Sanya, the perception, Chetana, the volition to do a certain action, Ekaggata, the one-pointedness, which we explained last week, Jivitindriya, the mental life faculty, which enables the mind stream to continue without breaking, without stopping, getting terminated, without getting terminated. Then the Manasikara, the attention. Attention, we had to explain, it's the mental factor which makes the chitta to get into this act of cognition. Then Vitakka, the initial application of the mind. Vichara, the sustained application. Adhimukha, the resolution. It can be either can associate Sobana and Akusalas, the resolution, having a confidence of a certainty about the object. Virya, the effort. Piti, the zest, and Chanda, the zeal. So these are the very basic, according to Theravadians, basic levels of cognition. So one thing to remember is, though Akusala Chittas are termed as the Chittas, which associate the Akusala Chetasikas, we also mentioned these very basic levels of Chetasikas are also associated in them. It is not possible that any Chitta would appear without this. It is not possible. It is not possible. It is not possible according to the tradition that any Chitta contains only Akusala Chetasikas. A Chitta contains only Sobana Chetasikas, which is not a possibility according to the tradition. So therefore, Anya Samana Chetasikas are associating all of these Chittas. But it doesn't mean that all the Chittas have the 13 Chetasikas. There are a certain mix of them. Some may be missing in certain Chittas, but at least some of them should be found in all the Chittas, right? So therefore, these Anya Samana, if we circulate it with blue color, right, Anya Samana can be found in Akusala Chittas as well, can be found in the Sobana Chittas as well. And then these Ahetuka Chittas have only the Anya Samanas. These two groups, right? So Akusala Chittas contain, why they are called Akusala Chittas? Because they have the Akusala Chetasikas, but together with these, few of these 13, and Sobana Chittas are the Chittas which associate the Sobana Chetasikas, but keep in mind, some of the Anya Samanas are also found in them. Then these 18 Ahetuka Chittas, are only associating these Anya Samana Chetasikas. I could have easily drawn it like without this blue line, which would give a more clearer picture. But technically, it is not perfect. That's why I drew this line. But before drawing it, we can have a, I think, better view on the chart. Now, Sobana Chittas are associated in Sobana Chetasikas, Akusalas are associated. Akusala Chittas are associated in Akusala Chetasikas. Then Ahetuka Chittas, these 18 Ahetuka Chittas has only the Anya Samana. They are neither considered ethically low nor ethically higher. Right? So these are the Ahetuka Chittas which only have the Anya Samana Chetasikas. But technically, we should keep in mind Anya Samanas, I think it's clearer. Anya Samanas can be found in Sobana as well. Right? Technically. Anya Samanas can be found in Akusalas as well. So that's why we drew the blue line. Blue line can be found in all the Chittas because they are the very basic characteristics of cognition. Right? So today we are going to discuss about these Chetasikas and briefly what are these. No, not the explanation of chittas. We are just going to explain how they are, like what are these chittas connected with this sobana chetasikas. Right. I hope everyone get a clear view on these, how the chittas and chetasikas are combined. Right, chittas and chetasikas are combined. So before we go into the explanation of sobana chetasikas, we discussed about the akusala chittas last time. We discussed about the akusala chittas. You go to the page number 1 again. Go to the page number 1. So the third category, akusala chittas are threefold as lobha mula, dosa mula, and moha mula. It was threefold again, right? Lobha mula, dosa mula, and moha mula. Lobha mula was 8. Lobha mula was 8. Then dosa mula were 2, and moha mula were 2 again, right? 2. Then in the akusala group, we had a list of 4, 3, 4, 2, 1, like the moha, ahirika, anuttappa, and so forth. We had a list of them. So when we say a lobha mula chitta, when we take a lobha mula chitta, we have some of the akusala chetasikas. If we take the lobha mula chitta, what are the chetasikas we have? In the akusala group, we have moha, ahirika, anuttappa, right? Then we have uddacha, we have lobha, ditti or mana, any of them. Then sometimes we have tina, middha, right? Just to give a rough idea. So these akusala, out of the 14 akusala chetasikas, only these can be found in a lobha mula chitta. Then from the anyasamana group, we can have all the 13. Right? Anyasamana, all the 13. So when we say a lobha mula chitta, chitta itself is the focus. Then all these mental factors are found together with this focus. So then that focus is called a lobha mula chitta. The main reason was this group contained the lobha, which is a very powerful mental, akusala mental state. It also contains moha, but lobha is prominent in this chitta. So when we take the dosa mula chittas, again we have some kind of these chetasikas, but there will not be any lobha if you take it a dosa mula chitta. Instead of lobha mula chitta, we take the dosa mula chitta. These two, dosa mula chittas. Not these 8, these 2 dosa mula chittas. We have the very basic akusalas. Then we have dosa, issa, o macharya, o kukucha, then tina, middha. In the anyasamana, we have only 12, for instance, right? For 12. Why there is no piti there? So what I want to mention is, now in the lobha dosa mula chitta, the mixture is different from that of dosa mula, lobha mula chittas. When we come to moha mula chittas, we have a different mixture. So likewise, when you are talking about a chitta and its chetasikas, in the end should be able to figure out what sort of chittas are associating what types of chetasikas. That's what the mixture is about. That's what the mixture is about. So even though we mentioned akusala chittas are associated in akusala chetasikas, but we should keep in mind these anyasamanas are also playing a role with those chittas. Sometimes we may use the word in the chitta, but keep it in mind that the focus and the mental factors are arising together as a cluster. Right? That is the basic explanation. Then we go into the sobana chetasikas. We go into sobana chetasikas. Sobhana Chetasikas. If you go to the handout, I think page number 7. Yeah, page number 7. 25 Sobhana Chetasikas, beautiful mental consciousness, mental factors. First one is Saddha. First one is called Saddha. Saddha is the purity of the mind. Saddha is the purity of the mind. There is a mental state which purifies the mind from unwholesome mental qualities. So it's like when in a muddy water, the legend says that a universal monarch, one who controls the entire human world in a certain era, possesses a gem called Udakappasada Manikya. Udakappasada Manikya means a gem that purifies the water, letting the dirt to go down, shrink down, sink down, and purifies for the water to a level that can be used instantly. So normally a universal monarch crossing a river with his huge retinue, huge forces, the army forces, suddenly he gets thirsty and asks for some water. So the servants would say the water is completely dirty because a huge army has just crossed the river. So then he gives his Udakappasada gem, the very special gem. Whenever they put it into the river, all the dirt in the river goes down and the upper layer becomes crystal clear, like it becomes utterly purified. So they take the water out of the river and offer to the universal monarch. He could drink it instantly. So likewise, our mind stream is usually occupied by unwholesome mental factors. The mind likes to go into the unwholesome. That is a very basic fundamental of the teachings. Buddha mentioned papasming ramati mano. The mind enjoys in unwholesome deeds. So there is a mental factor called the saddha, which purifies our mind, letting the akusalas to go down or go away from our mind stream, and makes the purity which facilitates all the other beautiful mental states to occur with it. I'll repeat it again. This saddha purifies the mind, and it acts as the basis for all the other ethically good qualities, such as mindfulness, such as generosity, loving kindness, wisdom to occur together with the focus, with the mind. So saddha is a very basic fundamental requirement for the mind to become good, to mind to become ethically valuable. So saddha is the chetasika which purifies the mind. Another aspect of this saddha is when the mind is pure, when the mind is purified or the mind is pure, whenever it focuses upon certain deep phenomena, such as the rebirth, the attributes of a noble being, a person like a Buddha, the existence of the nirvana, the validity of a practice, the spiritual growth, these kinds of phenomena which are beyond the ordinary human observation. So when the mind is pure, when the mind is directed towards such phenomena, it starts to accept it. It starts to believe in that, in such nature, such phenomena. It's like the example is given when the water of a river is pure or clean. Whatever the shadows of the surrounding objects would easily come into onto this surface, and they can be seen very clearly, unlike on a muddy surface. So likewise, when the mind is pure, it is able or capable in accepting the good qualities, the true qualities of the phenomena. So therefore, saddha has also been explained as the acceptance or the belief about the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, the validity of the practice, and the existence of rebirth, the functioning of karma, and so forth. But the very basic characteristic of saddha is to purify the mind. So in that sense, even a non-Buddhist, one who doesn't have any belief in rebirth or doesn't have belief in karma, can also do wholesome deeds according to Theravada tradition. For instance, when someone sees a dog who is in trouble, who's suffering, atheist or one who doesn't believe in karma could still feel the compassion toward this living being and would help him. So in that, such an act is considered as wholesome or ethically valuable in the Theravada tradition. Why? So in such cetasika, in such moments, he does possess saddha. Saddha arises in him. So what is the functioning of this saddha? Helping a dog is not the belief of karma or anything else. It just facilitates the mind, purifies the mind from unwholesome concerns, such as he would have easily ignored the suffering of the living being and would have concerned about his own well-being. Or sometimes he may feel happy about the suffering of the living being if the dog was disturbing him. So such unwholesome thoughts would have occurred in the mind instead of the compassion. So what the saddha did was, saddha purified the mind, threw away or pushed away the unwholesome thoughts, and it purified the mind. The purification has to be explained in two ways. The purification of the mind, and why the purification has happened, it has pushed away the unwholesome thoughts from the mind. It has facilitated this. So therefore, it facilitates the good qualities like loving kindness, compassion to occur in the mind. So therefore, saddha is the very basic characteristic of saddha is to purify the mind by removing the unwholesome qualities. We can call extension of this quality of this purification is the belief about the true phenomenon. Then one can ask a question, what about the belief of a false phenomenon according to Buddhism? That we explain based on Adhimokka, right? We'll be discussing them in later chapters in the future courses. Then we come to the second mental state, which is called sati. Sati normally we translate it as mindfulness. According to the tradition, the Theravada, sati is the mental force which keeps the mind in the ethical side without letting it to go into the unwholesomeness. It's like a force. Saddha purifies the mind. It seems like they are the sides of the same coin. But according to the teachings, the Buddha has felt that they are two different entities. Sati is explained as the force which keeps the mind in the wholesome side or the ethical side without letting it to go astray into the unwholesomeness. And also it is explained as the awareness. Sometimes these days it has been explained as the awareness of the present moment. But in the Theravada tradition, the awareness is not exclusive to the present moment. For instance, if I happen to give this lecture, keeping the iPad on my hand, if I happen to give this lecture, I'll be very careful about my movements. If I unnecessarily move my hand, this may fall down. So therefore, while I'm giving the lecture, always constantly, regularly, I am giving an attention and reminding myself that there is some breakable of tangible, fragile thing on my hand. So likewise, the mindfulness is a force which keeps the mind in the wholesome side. At the same time, it always reminds us about our status, what we are doing. So for instance, how the mindfulness is applied in Sila. We take the Sila of a monk. There's a number of large number or enormous number of silas, the Sikkhapadas, monks have to follow. But it doesn't mean that all monks have to always keep on reciting or thinking about these rules. After we have learned them, we implant them in our consciousness, like we keep it in our mind. We try to be aware of them. So then whenever a certain thing is going to happen, if the monk is mindful, the mindfulness reminds him that you are about to break a rule. For instance, monks are not allowed to, we talk about the one rule regarding while we have eating. Monks are not supposed to talk while the food remains in the mouth. It doesn't mean that few food particles. If the mouth is filled with food, unable to utter the words properly, so at that time we are not supposed to talk. For instance, while we have put the food into mouthful into our mouths, and while we are chewing, someone asks us a question. So then we have the urge to answer. But if the person is mindful, so while I was talking, I had the urge to suddenly take my hand and write something on the board. So if I'm mindful, I would keep, if my awareness is good, I would keep it first on the desk and go and write, because I was aware that some breakable thing is on my hand. So likewise, when the mindfulness is present while we are eating, so if someone asks a question, the mindfulness would remind us, you are not supposed to answer now. You have to first eat, finish the food in your mouth, and then you have to answer. So that is called the awareness. So in the Theravada tradition, sati, mindfulness, is not the focus on the present moment. There is no, Buddha has, now when we think about the sutras, Buddha has given how the mindfulness can be brought into the past objects. How do we consider about the past objects and so forth. So the scope of mindfulness is very, very huge. But at the same time, we have to mention, if someone is maintaining a good awareness in the present moment, if someone maintains a good awareness in the present moment, that is also a part of the mindfulness. But the scope of mindfulness is not confined to the present moment. It has a larger scope. So that's why in the Theravada tradition, we explain mindfulness as the force which keeps the mind in the wholesome side, not letting it go into the unwholesome side. So that is the broader explanation of mindfulness, and that can be found while we are doing contemplation on the Buddha's attributes, while we are paying respect to a senior, while we are doing some duties to the others, even while I am teaching this Dhamma. I have mindfulness in terms of keeping my mind in the wholesome side, not letting it go into the unwholesome side. So the mindfulness is explained as the force which keeps the mind in the ethical side. So then we come into the, so it's also utterly necessary factor. Without mindfulness, none of the wholesome qualities would appear in our mind. Then we have Hiri and Ottappa, number 3 and 4. Hiri and Ottappa. Right? Hiri and Ottappa. These are called the ethical, the moral shame and the moral fear, moral dread. Moral shame and moral fear appears when we are about to. It becomes manifest. It manifests obviously on occasions when we are supposed to do certain immoral deeds. Certain immoral deeds. While we are about to, supposed to do. At that time, sometimes we feel shameful or to do it, or we feel like it's not proper for a person like me to do such an act. So that if that moral quality arises in our mind, we abstain from doing that act. Sometimes we see the dangers of doing an evil, the results that we would encounter in future by doing such unwholesome acts. Also the insult that we may get in this very life after doing such acts, the mean acts. So seeing the dangers, we get the ottappa, the fear, and seeing the inappropriateness proportionate to our character, we get the hiri. So hiri and ottappa are considered as the protectors of the civilization, lokapalaka dhammas. So that's why people have limitations in their acts, that we don't cross certain borders, right? We don't cross certain borders. They are also ethically valuable according to the tradition. Then we have alobha and adosa, another two, alobha and adosa. Alobha means detachment. Detachment is a mental factor which suppresses the attachment, suppresses lobha, craving. Its manifestation is very obvious while we practice charity, giving dana. We have a detachment towards our objects that we possess, so that's why we are able to donate it to someone else. And also it is very conspicuous in moments, in occasions like observing the repulsiveness of our body. So then the lust that we have towards ourselves gets subdued, about ourselves and also about others. So in Asubha Bhavana, the repulsive meditation, and also seeing the repulsiveness of the food, ahare patikula sanya, and also while giving charity, this alobha becomes very obvious. Adosa is the non-hatred, which suppresses the hatred or the anger. It manifests as loving kindness in some occasions, not like wishing for the welfare of other beings, not getting angry or upset with someone. So this adosa is also one of the very basic requirements in our mind, dealing with the object in a proper manner without getting without getting upset about it. Alobha and adosa, when we talk about very basic cognition, alobha and adosa are very necessary in every sobhana chitta, every good type of chitta. So with that, we are not attached to the object, we are not disliking the object, so we maintain a very good balance in our mind because of these two mental factors. Then we have another factor called tatra majjatata. Tatra majjatata. It's a long word, I know. Tatra majjatata. The tatra majjatata has been explained as, so we see when we have alobha and adosa, also there is a certain kind of a balance in our mind, in the wholesome side. Tatra majjatata is also maintaining a certain balance, that is not letting the mind to go into extremes, For instance, if our mind goes into the extreme of concentration without maintaining proper effort, it falls into sleepiness. If it has too much effort in practice, for instance, without proper concentration, high level of concentration, good level of concentration, it may go into restlessness. So likewise, there should be a balance in these extremes. So this tatra majjatata brings that balance or equality. So that's why, especially in meditation practice, there is an occasion where the mind has to be balanced with effort, with the effort and the concentration has to be, balance has to be maintained. Sometimes the mind goes into extreme happiness, which can also take us out of the proper practice. Sometimes it comes into a roughness, like it becomes boring and so forth. So not letting the mind to go into these extremes, the mind has to be kept in a very middle path. So tatra majjatata maintains this middleness of the mind, but it doesn't mean tatra majjata is not the middle path. Middle path is a constitution of lots of factors. So middle path means not going to the two extremes of having two wrong beliefs in the practice. When you are talking about middle path, so this tatra majjata also have certain kind of a middleness, though it's not it doesn't represent the entire middle path. Middle path means the eightfold path. So in that sense, the two extremes are gratifying the senses with the belief that the real happiness of a life, the real liberation, is to gain sensual pleasure. Another extreme is the liberation can be obtained by tormenting the body and the mind. So these are the two extremes, but the middle path is we have a gradual development by observing sila, developing concentration and attaining the wisdom. We will be able to get rid of the suffering of rebirth. So it's a different path. And also that middle net doesn't mean that in the two extremes, someone gratifies the senses in an extreme level and also torment our senses or the body and the mind in an extreme level. The middle part doesn't mean that we have some sort of gratification and some sort of tormenting. It's a completely different path. So why is called middle path? So when we have two extremes, extreme opposite ends, and if someone preaches Dhamma without going into these extremes, eventually he has preached in the middle of these two extremes. So why Buddha has to preach in the middle? Because the two extremes were there. Extremes means there's nothing beyond that. So the two extremes of the practice is gratifying the senses as much as possible, tormenting the senses and the self as much as possible to eradicate the karma. So what is left is to preach something other than these two. When the two extremes are there, when you preach something new or something other than that, eventually it falls into the middle track. So that's why it's called the middle path. It doesn't mean that a person practicing in Buddhism should have some sort of gratification or some sort of tormenting of the self. No, these elements should not be brought in to explain the middle path. Middle path is a completely different practice, a practice which explains that the real liberation from the samsara is obtained by gradually developing sila, coming into a good concentration, understanding the truth, and cutting off the kilesas. In this one aspect, the kilesas are given the food and they are strengthened. In the one aspect, kilesas are suppressed in an extreme level to not letting them come up. So Buddha understood it's not the way to deal with the kilesas, which are the reason for the rebirth. They have to be eradicated with understanding, right? So some practitioners in the middle path have to practice smoothly. They are unable to practice in extreme levels. But some practitioners need to go into extreme levels, like practicing dhutangas and having ordaining and restraining from eating in the afternoon, and so forth. So there are varieties in the middle path. So what I wanted to explain is this tatra majjatata, though it has been explained as in a balance of the chitta, it is not the middle path. It's a part of the middle path. We can say the part of the middle practice. And the middle path also should be known very clearly according to Buddhist teachings. Then we have a list of cetasikas from number 8 to number 19. Pairs. We have pairs. Kaya passaddhi, chitta passaddhi. Kaya lahuta, chitta lahuta. Kaya mudita, chitta mudita. Kaya kammanyata, chitta kammanyata. Kaya pagunyata, chitta pagunyata. Kaya ujjukata, chitta ujjukata. So I'll just explain the basic meanings of these. Kaya here represents the group of cetasikas. Kaya represents the group of cetasikas. Chitta represents the focus. Chitta represents the focus. So the explanation is there is a tranquility of the mental sphere, tranquility. That is called passaddhi. All the wholesome acts are associated with such tranquility. And the next thing is, only when the mind is tranquil, it is able to have good ethical qualities. Then we have lightness of the body, lightness of the mind and the mental factors, which is opposite to the wholesome thoughts like thina middha and so forth, which makes our mind and the body heavier. Then we have mudita, malleability. Malleability means softness, we can call. It's not very rigid. The mind is not rigid when the mudita is present. Then wieldiness. Wieldiness is it's not appropriate or it's not suitable for certain wholesome deeds. So when the kammanyata, wieldiness is present, it's like a pure gold which can be used to make any of the ornament, any ornament of any shape very easily. So likewise, the mind is very adaptable to. Adaptable means it's adaptable to all the wholesome acts when the kammanyata is present. Then proficiency, pagunyata, the ability of maintaining the wholesome acts very without getting away from them. He's proficient in these acts, so it comes with gradual practice. Then we have rectitude, is the ujjukata. The mind is direct, erect. Erect doesn't mean, there are two types of erectness. One is the being honest. The one is always continuously practicing on the path without going up forward and backwards. Like sometimes we may do wholesome deeds, sometimes we may go into unwholesomeness. So there is a flux in the normal person's mind. So that happens because the ujjukata is absent. And also we can say mindfulness was absent. At the same time, ujjukata means it is the crookedness of the mind. He is not constant in his practice. And there are 12 chetasikas as explained as six pairs. According to the one commentary, sub-commentary, the Lady Sayadaw, Venerable Lady Sayadaw suggests that though they have been explained as 12 chetasikas, they should be considered as just 6, because it's not logical to consider tranquility of the chetasikas and tranquility of the mind separately. It's just tranquility is found in a mental cluster. Why? But why it has been explained as twofold as kaya and chitta? Because it has an effect to the body. All these 6 mental qualities have a great effect to the body. So that's why they have been explained as twofold, even though the Dhammasangani explains them as the tranquility of the chetasikas and tranquility of the mind as separately. When we observe it, it becomes clearer that it's just a one tranquility in the mind, the mental cluster, which supports the entire ethical thing. So that is something to be discussed in further lectures, like when we come into these chetasikas. Then we have 20, 21, and 22. Samma Kammanta, Samma Vacha, Kammanta, and Ajiva. These are the restrainments. They are not found in all the Sobhana Chittas. While we restrain from evil acts, evil verbal acts, lying, slandering, and so forth, and while we restrain from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, and various other unwholesome acts, bodily acts, we have these Samma Vacha and Samma Kammanta. So the restrainments are these 2 chetasikas. Then Samma Ajiva is restraining from unwholesome livelihood. Livelihood is to maintain our lives or our families, to support our lives or our families. So some people may do certain evil deeds for the sake of the livelihood. So if someone abstains from such livelihood, that is considered as a special mental factor. They are found in special occasions. Then we have Karuna and Mudita. Karuna is the compassion, the desire of a being, desire of a person to alleviate the suffering of someone, to take someone away from the suffering, to bring him happiness. And then Mudita is the appreciation of someone else's success or someone else's happiness. So the difference of Karuna and Metta is Metta has a desire to make the other one happy or to give pleasures to others. Karuna is to make someone happy by removing him from the suffering. Mudita is appreciating, wishing that may his happiness retains, that may he not be apart from the happiness. Upekka is considering about the causal effects, cause and effects of karma and its vipaka, and maintaining a very equal mindset towards the ones who are happy and also ones who are in suffering. So these are the 4 Brahma Viharas, divine abodes explained in the mental sphere. Then Panyindriya, the wisdom, which sees the true nature of an object. When the Panya, the wisdom, is connected with the focus, the focus is able to see the real natures of the object. Chitta is called the focus. Then the Panya, the last mental factor in the Sobhana group, is present. The focus is able to penetrate into the true qualities of the object and to understand, have a deeper understanding in it. Right. So these are the 25 Sobhana Chetasikas, which you explained in very briefly. So these Sobhana Chetasikas are associating these Chittas. So what are these Chittas? We go into the first page of the handout. First page, we can see the first 2 are the classifications. The first classification is about this row, the 4 types of Chittas. The second classification, the Kamavachara, is again into threefold. Then the next classification is these Akusala are threefold as Lobha Mula, Dosa Mula, and Moha Mula. I have given the names, even the Pali names. Then we have 18 ahetuka, which we didn't discuss, right? The page number 2. 18 ahetuka chittas are threefold as akusala vipaka, kusala vipaka, and kriya, which we'll be discussing next week. So it's threefold. There are 18, right? So we have 7 akusala vipaka, 8 kusala vipaka, 3 kriya. Then we have kama sobhana. Now this is, we are in the sobhana chitta group now, kama sobhana. So in the kama sobhana is threefold as maha kusala, maha vipaka, and maha kriya. 8, 8, 8, right? Kusala vipaka, and kriya. We'll have a brief explanation on what they are after we have concluded this lesson next week. Then we go into the page number 4. So all these 8 have been explained. They are very similar in names. Only the difference is kusala vipaka kriya. You can read at your leisure. Then we come into the Rupavachara group. 15 is divided again into 5, 5, 5, right? Then Rupavachara kusala, Rupavachara vipaka, Rupavachara kriya. Then we go into the next group, Arupavachara kusala, vipaka, kriya, 4, 4, 4, right? Higher jhana. Then page number 5, the last classification, Lokuttara kusala, vipaka, 4, 4, right? 4 and 4. So in the Sobhana group, the thing to keep in mind is Sobhana group always have 3 classifications, or 3 or 2. What are these? Kusala, wholesome. Vipaka, results of this wholesome, good vipaka, pleasant vipaka. Then kriya. Kriya means the same acts, the wholesome acts are done by a arahant. When we do a wholesome act, it can bring vipaka. But when an arahant, a noble, like one who has eradicated the defilements, do the same act, it is not able to give any results. So this is the classification. All the Sobhana chittas are classified as kusala vipaka kriya. Kusala is the acts that we do normally. Vipaka are its results. Kriya, when the same act is done by a arahant, those are called kriya. Then in the Arupavachara also we have ku, vi, kri. Means kusala 4, vipaka 4, kriya 4. In the Lokottara also we have kusala and vipaka. 4 and 4. It doesn't have any kriya. It doesn't have any kriya. So in the Sobhana group, we have always kusala vipaka kriya. Kusala are the minds, the acts. When a normal ordinary person do such acts, those are called kusala because they are already ethically higher qualities. Then there are results. The pleasant results that are produced by these kusalas are called vipaka. Then when such acts are done by a arahant, those are called kriya, right? Those are called kriya. So these chittas are associating these Sobhana chetasikas. These chittas are associating Sobhana chetasikas and also some of the Anya Samana chetasikas. Because Anya Samana chetasikas are the basic requirements of cognition, right? Basic requirements of cognition. So I hope I was able to explain the relationship between Sobhana, the beautiful mental factors, with beautiful consciousness. Next week, we are going to discuss about the very basic attributes of cognition, Anya Samana, and about the Ahetuka Chittas in brief. Afterwards, we'll be explaining what these Chittas are in brief terms. What are they and what are their practical applications. Yeah. So I'll conclude the lecture with this and leaving the session for the Q&A part. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Just like before, hello everyone. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box or raise your hand and we'll read out your questions. In the meantime, Bhante, may I have a question about the Panyendriya, the last Sobhana Cetasika. So here you defined it as the seeing the true nature of the object. But this question is very similar to the question like last week about avijja. So the question is, what is the basic level of Panyendriya, Bhante? Because to be honest, sometimes the Mahakusala Citta, we have that Mahakusala Citta, but it doesn't mean that we actually see the true nature of the object.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. So what the question is now, we have, if you go into the, for the other readers, page number 8 of the handout, page number 7 and 8. 7 is the 25 Sobhana Chetasikas. In the list, in the next page, we have the last one called Panyindriya. Panyindriya is translated as the wisdom faculty, wisdom. So we have Panyindriya. It's called wisdom. It's called wisdom. So this topic about wisdom, the question was asked by Dr. Ryan, what is the basic requirement for this? What is the basic level of wisdom, Panyindriya? Because last time there was a question about moha. Then, because moha was explained as the delusion or the non-understanding about the Four Noble Truths. I think some question asked this point, and we have explained it as, but in the very basic level, moha is the mental factor which makes the mind not to fall into the extremes, like not to take the object, not to get attached to the object, or not to dislike the object. So that's the very basic level of moha. So if the mind, if the moha is present, mind either goes into such extremes, or it get deluded about, or it get restless or something. Some mental unwholesome thoughts would appear, qualities would appear. So the moha, the requirement of moha is like when the moha is not present, the mind is able to take the object in a proper manner. So then the question comes, what is the requirement of, what is the level of Panyindriya? Panyindriya is normally explained in the teaching as knowing the Four Noble Truths. Is one aspect. So is the every Panyindriya is able to know the Four Noble Truths? No. The basic requirement is the mind, basic explanation of Panyindriya is it sees the object more deeper than the focus. Focus is knowing the object, it delimits the objects and knows the object having separated it from others. Then the perception recognizes the object, sanya, which we'll be discussing next week. Sanya recognizes the object. Every object has its own unique type of a nature. When the focus is taking the object, sanya becomes sensitive to that uniqueness. So we are able to distinguish one object from other. Then the Panyindriya, the wisdom, knows some extra attributes of this object. Another very similar quality which we'll be discussing next week is vichara. Vichara means, if you go into the handout, page number 6, 13 Anya Samana, number 9, vichara, sustained application of the mind. The sustained application is also explained as is able to know the shallow qualities of the object. Shallow qualities means it becomes, it starts to investigate qualities like the name, the color, the shape of a certain object. That's why it is very useful in jhana practices to make the object more clear. So perception is sensitive to such aspects. Vichara gets to know about such aspects more and more, but the wisdom knows some advanced qualities of the object. It is not necessarily that this knowing is related to Four Noble Truths. It's not necessary that this knowing is going into Four Noble Truths. Then what is the basic requirement, basic level where we should write the borders? Objects have every object in the world, according to the tradition, doesn't possess certain qualities. Like there are certain false qualities of an object. For instance, there is no self in any of the objects. And in the Sankata, the conditioned objects are never permanent and are also not pleasurable in ultimate level. It doesn't give pleasure in the ultimate level. So likewise, if the mind starts to see the false qualities of an object, then we call it has fallen into the level of moha. It has fallen into the level of moha. Then the mind comes into a mind without moha takes the object without focusing on such, without accepting or believing in such false qualities. So that is a very basic requirement for the mind to not to fall into the moha with the akusala group, into the akusala group. Then we are left with the focus, knowing the object, having separated it from other objects. Then in that focus itself, now we write it. Now this is the focus. So this is the object. It has separated from other. It has been the object has been separated from other objects by this focus. So now, if there is no moha, means there is no wrong considerations about this object as self, permanent, and so forth. Then with this, in this focus, we have certain attributes such as perception, knowing the becoming sensitive to its unique characteristics. Sometimes we have vichara, knowing more and more about such shallow attributes, and focus is taking the role. Now when we add the panya, amoha, when we add it, if it is present, it is able to see some advanced qualities about this object, right? And the scope of this panya is not only confined to the practice. Now, for instance, a scientist will be able to know some deeper aspects of a certain phenomena or deeper aspects of a certain object. Maybe he may be seeing a partial truth. He may be seeing a partial truth, but his observation, if it was deeper than the ordinary understanding, we call that his mind was occupied by, his mind was associated with panya. For instance, observing an object, if someone understands that there is some kind of a heat element found in each and every object, which are not obvious to our day-to-day observation, that the effect of heat or effect of a cohesion in all the objects, that understanding has come with a deep penetration, a more advanced penetration. But he may not be able to see all the four factors, all the forces, how are functioning in every object. Though he has seen a partial truth, if that understanding is beyond the normal observation of ordinary being, we call he has wisdom. Now, someone is investing his money in the market, and if he thinks more deeper and sees how the market is functioning properly, and if he's not motivated by his emotions, in such cases, such pondering or such investigation is associated with wisdom. Then when we come into the spiritual aspect, if someone knows about, understand the karma and its results, understand the true natures of the object, obviously this falls into the panya group. So it's very difficult to draw the border when this level is present, panya is present, this level is present, the panya is absent. When it comes to the ordinary objects, like the day-to-day life objects, when is the panya is present and not? So the thing is, like, if the mind has gone into a deeper consideration about something, and that consideration is not utterly wrong. Utterly wrong means not taking something as ultimately pleasurable, ultimately permanent, or some other wrong considerations, or at the same time some unrealistic contemplations, like this was created by someone, or some kind of unrealistic observation. Then we would surely say it was not the moha, panya was not present in them, even though such seems like such deep considerations have happened. So then what we say is, now if such some kind of advanced consideration, penetration is found, and if that object is real, if the object possesses such real contributions, even though it's a partial observation, we still say the wisdom is present. So the scope of wisdom spreads in a larger scale, not confined to the Four Noble Truths, not confined to the spiritual aspect. In day-to-day life, wisdom is found, especially when someone is studying subjects such as science, maths, and some social things. Wisdom can be found. So yeah, that's what I would like to give. And it's very difficult to draw the border where the Panya is present and not in the secular sphere.
Okay, thank you so much, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, please go ahead with your question, Mr. Ananda.
Bante, now when you mentioned about mindfulness and present moment, now can there be a mindfulness without present moment, Bante?
Yes, obviously.
But the mindfulness can be practiced only at the present moment, is it or no?
According to the Theravada tradition, no. Mindfulness is no relation with present moment. It has no relationship with present moment. Because if you think about the Vipassana practice, technically, the present moment Vipassana is not possible according to Theravada. Actually. For instance, when we focus on a certain object, like I'll go into the extreme example, then we come into how the Buddha has explained about the mindfulness in the doctrine. For instance, when we are focusing on doing Vipassana, we did the Vipassana observation, we see a certain object. So according to the teachings, what happens, according to the Abhidhamma teaching, there are mind is working in processes, right? Mind is working in processes. So what happens is when we have the basic observation, the mind, this reality arises and passes away quickly, right? So we observe during its momentary existence. So this first observation knows what the object knows, means becomes sensitive to the object. Then this observation can never have, for instance, Vipassana. It can have mindfulness. Mindfulness means the mind is not thrown into the unwholesome side, but it cannot have that deep understanding about the object. The real Vipassana Vipassana understanding comes up only after this process has gone. So then we think about that same object and we starts to know its actual natures, impermanent suffering and non-selfness. Then at that time, the object has already passed. It's a past object that we are focusing. So technically, the next thing is if a mind arises in us and then we are aware of that mind, it has to happen with another mind because the two minds can never occur in one person. So this is obvious that Vipassana, Vipassana mindfulness is always found. It's very rarely found with the present object. There can be extreme cases like observing others' mind and directly observing your rupa with the mindo. There can be some rare occasions the present moment mind Vipassana can occur, but technically it's not there. Then now someone can ask, this is talking about Vipassana. So what about the mindfulness? There can be some mindfulness without Vipassana. Yeah, mindfulness is a huge, larger scope. Mindfulness doesn't always need to be Vipassana. Even while we are contemplating the Buddha's attributes, the mindfulness is still present. For instance, we are focusing on the Buddha's qualities in Buddhanusati. Buddha's qualities. Buddha's qualities, we normally take them as past objects or abstract objects, we can say. So at that time, there is no present moment awareness. But sati, mindfulness, is surely there. And then if you go into the Natakarana Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, Natakarana Sutta, Buddha mentions the mindfulness as contemplating, able to remember the things that we have done in the past, long past. The tradition explains it's not just merely remembering what we have done in the past. It's contemplating on the past. Now, for instance, I have done a donation to a certain temple or to certain monks, or done some duties to my teachers few years back. So now I would contemplate that my wholesome deed. And also sometimes the unwholesome acts that I have done in the past, like killing animals, killing creatures, or stealing, whatever act we have done. So these things can be remembered, recalled by us. So what the Buddha mentions is, according to the tradition, Theravadians interpret this. The Buddha says he is able to recall chira katampi, chira basitampi, sarita anusarita. He didn't mention whether they are wholesome or unwholesome. So the tradition explains this. What is this remembrance? What does it mean? Is it just remembering what we have done, acts that we have done in the past? So the tradition explains, no, it's not just mere recalling what we have done. It's remembering them in terms of vipassana practice. Vipassana practice means thinking, remembering, knowing, understanding. All these words I will be using: thinking, remembering, understanding, contemplating. That only aggregates did such acts. There was no person who did such acts on those occasions. Just Nama Rupa occurred and Nama Rupa passed away. Those Nama Rupas are not present at this moment. So that is called a Vipassana mindfulness, according to the Natakarna Sutta. Then we come into another explanation found in the tradition. This we come in the commentary literature in the Digha Nikaya, Samanya Pala Sutta. Not the sutta itself, commentary. It's a very long sutta. You have to go into Sampajana. Kata. Sampajana or Sampajanya, I forgot it. Sampajanya, right? Whatever. Sampajana or Sampajanya. So it explains about an instruction given by one of the ancient arahants of the tradition. So there were 7 special arahants mentioned in the Theravada tradition who are unable to attain the arahanthood, meeting the Buddha while he was alive. They became delayed because of some delay in their practice while they were coming in the samsara with the Bodhisattva in 5 jatakas. So there were 7 arahants who were born in Sri Lanka at a later period and became enlightened. So one of them is Mahasiva. So he's considered one of the great commentators or teachers of the era, and he became an arahant at the age of 90. And the legend says, the tradition says, he had 30,000 disciples who attained arahant. So his instructions were, he has given the instructions on Vipassana. We can see in the Samanya Pala Sutta, his instructions, a person who attained arahanthood and also who guided 30,000 students to become arahant. So he mentions when mindfulness in walking, because in the Satipatthana Sutta, Buddha mentions gate tite nisinne sutte jagarite bhasite tunhi bhave sampajanakari. So in going, standing, sitting, or in all these acts, one have to be mindful. So this has been explained by this arahant. He became arahant later on, but he was able to guide the students into arahanthood. So his explanation was there are 2 ways that mindfulness or the vipassana can be practiced while walking. One way is while you do the practice while we are walking, we see mindfully we see the changes of the body, changes of the rupa, and see the vipassana. But even that at that moment, technically, if you go, there cannot be present moment mindfulness, because the mind that lifts your leg and takes your legs forward are unable to see the truth. So those minds are wasted or used to lift the leg and move the leg and keep the leg. A different mind process which comes precedes that is able to see the vipassana reality in vipassana meditation. Even while walking, even we do that constantly, it is not a present moment mindfulness. It is not a present moment vipassana contemplation. It happens, the chittas are dedicated to to lift the leg or to move the body, then the chittas which instantly follow these chittas are able to see what has happened already. But we feel it like we do it at the same time. Technically, it is not possible. Otherwise, we have to bring a fundamental saying that two minds are existing at the same moment, which is utterly contradictory to the tradition. Then the next way he's explaining, you can do it while walking, or you do the walking, and you do the finish the walking maybe with a different contemplation about with metta or with anapana or with buddhanusati, whatever, and then you stand at the end of the walking path, and then you start to contemplate what has happened in the path, what has happened while you're walking, how the nama and rupa changed, and how that impermanent suffering and non-selfness occurred. So this is the second way of doing the vipassana. So it's very obvious that it is contemplating about on a past object. And even that, ironically, what has happened is, even today we talk about a present moment mindfulness. Technically, it is impossible to have a present moment mindfulness in vipassana practice. So I exclusively explained the explanation on the vipassana level. I assume that the question was raised on such basis. And so the mindfulness in the Theravada tradition has a broader scale, and it has been explained based on the sila, based on the samadhi, and so forth. So that's why I gave the example about the awareness, that we are aware about what we are doing, and it doesn't let the mind go into the astray. Then the counter question can be asked, isn't that the present awareness, that we are aware of what we are doing? We are not letting the mind to go into extreme levels. Yes, in that sense, we can say we are aware about what we are doing each and every moment, We may call it the present moment, but technically it's not the present moment. Because when I'm talking, when I'm giving a talk, if I'm observing my mind, I always observe my mind with another mind. The observed mind has already passed away while we are doing the observation. So therefore, if we use technically the present moment awareness, which is a contradicting statement to Buddhist teaching, but I understand what the general sense is, that you are always aware about the mindfulness, but aware about what is happening. But it is also better not to confine into this sphere, because when you go into the Natakarana Sutta, the mindfulness, the 9th or 8th attribute of a monk, the mindfulness, as has been explained, he is able to recall the things that he has done in the far years back. And the commentators, the tradition says this contemplation has to be done with vipassana contemplation. So that's what the Buddha meant here as mindfulness. So that's why I regularly say the scope of mindfulness is not confined to the present moment. It has a larger scope. Is it clear or?
Bhante, actually, I was thinking of, I did not think about the object. Object can be past, but the action can happen only now. So that's my understanding was. In
that regard, whatever, even if we are doing a akusala thing, even we are doing a akusala thing, that action is present, right?
Yes.
So whatever action we do is present. So this is not just the mind itself is present is not a criteria to call the mindfulness is present, because in that sense, lobha is also present, dosa is also present. So if we indulge in certain act without any mindfulness, that act is also a present moment act. So, but we don't going to say that present moment lobha, we don't going to call that present moment dosa. We tend not to call it likewise, because that even though we are aware about the indulging object, we don't call it the present moment lobha. So likewise, mindfulness, the act happens, the observation happens the present moment, because every act occurs in the present moment. So that is not a way to use that the mindfulness is present in that aspect. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Bhante. Thank you. And just one more thing to add to it. What about the mindfulness in Arahant? So that is that in the present moment?
No. It's not
No.
necessary. Not necessary.
Okay. Okay, Bhante. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bante. Saru, Saru, Saru. So there is just one more question in the chat box, Bante.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question is, Bante, could you please repeat what you explained about Kaya Chitta? So I guess it is like the 6th pair of the Chaitasikas. So why is it 12, but we can understand it as 6? And then could you please repeat about Kamanyata, Pagumnyata, and Uchukata, an example of their function in daily life?
Okay, so it's also very important and useful. The Kamanyata, first we come into the Kamanyata, Pagunyata, and Ujukata. Kamanyata is our mind is adaptable to do certain acts. So it is all is like the readiness, we can call the readiness. Sometimes our mind, certain acts, our mind is not compatible to do certain acts. So this, it can also be explained as his rigidness, but this mind needs to have compatibility to do certain acts. So it's, we normally say like it's I forgot the example, the simile which was given. It says, if I give me 1 second. Yeah. Kamanyata is the readiness or fitness of the mentalities for wholesome deeds. When the mind is occupied with hindrances such as kamachanda, it is not to fit for wholesome acts. A person who has strong hindrances cannot keep his mind fixed in wholesome acts as he wishes. He's not able to do it as he wish. It will quickly get away from the unwholesome track and fall back into the unwholesome side. Kamanyata is opposite to nivarana. It's opposite to the hindrances. When it is strong, the mind is adaptable to many sort of wholesome deeds as pure gold, which can easily be used to make jewelry. A person's mind with weak kamanyata retards back to unwholesomeness when he initiates wholesome deeds. When we start the wholesome deeds, it retards back as husks that are being thrown against the wind. Against the wind blows back. When you throw certain husk, you know, the husk that is taken out from the paddy, when you throw it to a wind, it will come back. So likewise, a person retards in the wholesome acts when he has weak kamanyata. When kamanyata is powerful, a person's mind keeps on going forward in the wholesome track as a heavy stone thrown against the wind goes forward, cutting the wind. Like it goes through the wind without coming back. It cannot be pushed by the wind. So likewise, this kamanyata is opposite of all the hindrances, and he is able to maintain his mind in the wholesome side without retarding. Then when coming to pagunyata, pagunya is the competence of mentalities in doing wholesome deeds. It is opposite to defilements such as vichikicha, like doubt, that makes the mind weak as being sick in good acts. So when we have vichikicha, we are like when we are sick, we are unable to do the acts freely, like we do it slowly. We are not very much interested in those acts. The mind is also a kind of retarding. So it becomes weaker in the wholesome acts. A person can develop this quality by frequently practicing kusala kammas. When we keep on practicing the kusala kammas, we eventually develop this proficiency. We can call the inability, like in proficiency in person. When pagunyata is weak, a person struggles and becomes tired in doing wholesome deeds, as someone who cannot swim struggles having fallen into deep water. When someone has fallen into deep water, he struggles to find a footing or struggles to swim in the water. So likewise, a person who initiates the wholesome acts with weak pagunyata is unable to perform them properly. When pagunyata is strong, a person can perform wholesome deeds competently as a crocodile easily swims in deep water. Right? So these are the explanation. Then the ujjukata is the straightness of wholesome mentality. There are two types of straightness. One is the honesty, like we say if someone has done a fault, we accept it. Like we don't hide the faults. That is called the honesty. Honesty doesn't mean you say whatever you do. Honestly is directly related with our faults. We accept our faults. We accept that we have done such things, such mistakes have happened. We don't conceal them. That is a one type of honesty. There's a second type of direct, the two types of straightness. One second type of straightness is we are straight in the wholesome path. So if we are crooked, like if we turn, if we bend from the wholesome path, means we go away from the wholesome path. So if someone is regularly doing wholesome and also coming back into wholesome, his path in the wholesomeness has bent. So the thing is, now this ujjukata is more difficult than the first type of ujjukata. First type of ujjukata is being honest. So in that case, we are liable. We know we are prone to do certain bad deeds, and after we do it, we accept it. It's much harder than concealing. Concealing is much easier. We accept our faults. It's also a development in our practice. But the highest ujjukata means we are not doing the wholesome deeds in the first place. Doing and accepting there is some quality in it, but overall it is not appreciated. So if we do not do any unwholesome acts, that is the real straightness. When ujjukata is weak in the mind, a person is not consistent in his wholesome acts. Sometimes he's eager in doing good deeds. Sometimes he feels lazy, and sometimes even falls back doing unwholesome acts. It should be noted that in order to improve our consistency in wholesome deeds, we need to enhance this benign mental quality, right? So there are some similes given, what types of bends that we have. Then these are the explanations about kammanyata, pagunyata, and ujjukata. Then we come into, I mentioned that though they are 12, they can be explained as 6. So this is what the Venerable Lady Sayadaw in Paramattha Dipani has explained, that these qualities, now mind and mental factors appear in clusters. They are called mental clusters. So when the tranquility is present, it is present in the mind, in the mental cluster. So the entire mentalities means mind and consciousness, both become tranquilized. They become light, they become adaptable, they become proficient. So these are, and also this can be applied into Tina Middha. The mind becomes weaker in the unwholesome side. So, but why it has been explained as Kaya and Chitta in the Dhammasangani? So the Kaya is exclusively mentioned as the weakness, or in Tina Middha, the weakness of Chetasikas, and in the Passaddhi, Lahuta, Mudita group, the tranquility, lightness, adaptability of Chetasikas. Then Chitta Mudita, Chitta Kammanyata, Chitta Pagunyata, Chitta Passaddhi, and so forth are explained as tranquility, lightness, malleability, proficiency in consciousness. So what the Lady Sayadaw is suggesting, that it is not possible to say that there is a one tranquility exclusive for the Chitta, one tranquility for the remaining Chetasika. So then another logical question can be asked, why there can't be a tranquility for Passa, why there can be a separate tranquility for Vedana, for each and every Chetasika. So he doesn't accept this idea. So then he suggests, but in the Dhammasangani we find it as being explained as the to the three Chetasikas exclusively. But it's correct, right? It can be used. The one, for instance, the one Lobha itself has been explained as Bhavaraga and Kamaraga. The Lobha, attachment towards sensual pleasure, and the attachment towards the Rupa realm, has been divided, even though they possess the same kind of Lobha. They appear in different mind moments, but the same Lobha can be divided based on the object, the manner it likes. So likewise, the tranquility, the lightness also can be explained in twofold. It is not wrong, the lightness of the mentalities, lightness of the mind. But when we come in to understand the ultimate reality level, it seems better to consider it as a one lightness in the entire mental cluster, one adaptability in the entire mental cluster. So then the Lady Sayadaw suggests why this division was made using this Kaya and Chitta. Because in many occasions we can see when our tranquility arises in our mind, our body also becomes tranquil. it becomes tranquil. It's very obvious in our meditation. When we are weak, when we are lazy, the mind retards. At the same time, we know when the weakness is very powerful, the Tina Middha is powerful, our body also get affected. We feel very heavy in the body. It's one of the defilements that cannot hide. If you are very lazy, Tina Middha is very high, it obviously it will get manifest through the body. Then when it comes to Pagunyata, Kamanyata, Lahuta, Muduta, the Sayadaw explains these qualities, like effect of these 5 qualities, starting from Lahuta, Muduta, Kamanyata, Pagunyata, and Ujjukata, can be seen in the matter while we perform the Iddhivida, like the psychic powers. Especially when we levitate into the sky, Lahuta of the mind affects the body, Lahusanyancha. So likewise, there is a great connection of these mental states with the body. So that's why in Dhammasangani, they have been explained as twofold, as Chitta, with the terms Chitta and Kaya. So this explanation you can find in the Paramattha Dipani regarding the Passaddi, Lahuta, Muduta, Kammanjata, and so forth. For the Tina Middha, he doesn't give this explanation. Personally, I adapt this same explanation into Tina Middha, and there have been some teachers who claims that even though Tina Middha has been explained as the weakness of the mind and the weakness of the Chetasika, in practicality, it is impossible to distinguish what are the the weakness of the mind and weakness of the Chetasika separately, because we find a mere one weakness in the mind. Yeah, that's why I mentioned so.
Okay, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. So time is up, but so there's one more question. So should we?
Yeah, we can take one more question.
Oh, okay,
because
sure, Bhante.
answer
Yes. So the question is, dear Bhante, classification reference to the present moment mindfulness explanation you made. Is it the same for Samatha Bhavana, for example, in the Anapanasati?
Yes. You mean like, is it while we focus on the Anapana, we feel the touch first. We observe, we feel the touch normally in the beginning level, not at the higher level. We feel the touch first. So when we feel the touch, it is a bodily consciousness is appearing. It's a different process. When with the mind though, we observe that conscious, that breath. So normally, according to Visuddhimagga, Anapanasati is known with the body though. Why it has a touch on this area. So then we have the focus on the breath body. So in the first initial stages, always the Kaya Vijnana process, the bodily consciousness process occurs first. Then a mind-o process focuses on this breath. So even at that moment, we can see there is a difference in the present moment. So the thing is now, I think we should not bring this into a very big issue, because when we have a present moment mindfulness in general sense that we are talking, we are aware of what we are doing. That is surely the mindfulness. When in breathing, we are aware we are breathing. When we are doing certain acts, we are aware we are doing certain acts. While we are eating, we are aware we are observing our mind, not letting the mind to go into defilements. This is pure mindfulness. That is, there's no doubt in it. But this adoption of this term, present moment mindfulness, what I personally see is has confined the real scope of the Theravada tradition. Present moment mindfulness is mindfulness, but it's not that present moment mindfulness is only the mindfulness. Only the present moment mindfulness is mindfulness. This statement is not acceptable in the Theravada tradition. Present moment mindfulness is mindfulness. There's no doubt in it. That is a very high level of mindfulness. That in some techniques, they always asked us to be mindful all the time about all the activities that we do. This is pure mindfulness, very high level of mindfulness. There's no doubt in it. Then if someone says present moment mindfulness is the only mindfulness, then this contradicts with the statement, because then we have to go in, when we want to analyze this explanation, we have to go into technicalities and also the sutras. Then we find It's not confined to the present moment. And also, as Mr. Ananda asked a very important question, like the act is done in the present moment. Yes. Then in that regard, every act is done in the present moment. Even unwholesome deeds are done in the present moment. So that presentness, we are not going to use to say the present moment lobha, the present moment dosa. We are not going to use such terminology. So therefore, even though the act of mindfulness occurs at the present moment, it is not a requirement. It is not appropriate to call it the present moment mindfulness, because then all the unwholesome deeds are done in the present moment. So whatever chitta occurs is a present moment, because it appears and passes away. During that moment, we call it present. Like the real functioning of mentalities have happened at the present moment. This is not a way to use the presentness into such a term. If we use, we have to use for all the mentalities. So that's why I regularly oppose this terminology. This term, if we are not, we can use this term, there's no problem in it. We can use this term, but that usage has been overused, I feel. So therefore, sometimes I have heard certain teachings like, if you are not mindful in the present, you are not mindful. The mindful is exclusive to the present moment. So this doesn't have any footing in the Theravada tradition. So that's why the Theravadians explain in a broader scale, saying that mindfulness is the force which doesn't let your mind to go into the unwholesomeness, regardless whether it's the future object or present object or a past object or even a conceptual object or even the nirvana, whatever object it is, the mind is kept in the wholesome side. That force is the mindfulness. So in that regard, we can apply this into our daily practice. I'll just take 1 or 2 minutes. Like even that's why I gave the example. While we are practicing sila, the mindfulness should be there. Otherwise, what happens? We may go away. Now, in how do we apply this in the samatha practice? While we are meditating, we are focusing on the object. So suddenly the mind goes away. So if the mindfulness was there while it was making that initial movement, so suddenly the movement happens, that like mind is going to give up the object, this concentration is getting weaker. So if the mindfulness was there, strong mindfulness, another consciousness would remind us it's getting weaker, we had to be careful, increase the strength. So why suddenly we find we were focusing in an object and suddenly we are focusing, pondering about something else for a few seconds, the mindfulness was missing, the awareness was missing. So then what happens? While we are pondering, another awareness comes up and lets us know, now we are going away from the object, so please bring back to the present object. So if the mindfulness is constant, what happens? Constantly it reminds us to be in the present, in the relevant object. I would not use the present moment, the relevant object. But when we think about the overall context, we understand, yes, isn't it the present moment? Yes, that is a present moment, present awareness. But then we have to say in a general sense. Then we should not overuse this term, because we are just telling it, be aware about what we are doing. Be aware of what we are doing. If we use the word present at that moment, then we come into technicalities. We are becoming technicality. Then we have problems in explaining based on the tradition. So using the term is okay to my understanding. This is my personal understanding based on my knowledge that I've had. It's okay, but we should be able to know what is its usage and when to use and how to generalize it, and how do we understand the broader sense of mindfulness according to the tradition.
Okay, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. And then there is another hand. So what do you think, Bhante?
Oh, it's already 10:10. Okay, just we'll give a chance because yeah.
Okay, Bhante. So please go ahead with your question, Sayale Uttama.
Yes, Modami Bhante, thank you very much for your teaching. I have a question about Tatra Machatata.
Saddhamma?
The Cetasika Tatra Machatata.
Is Tatra Machatata, Bhante?
Okay, Tatra Majjatata. Okay, right.
Yes. So, you say it is a kind of new notion to me that this Cetasika is preventing the mind not to go to the two extremes. What
Yeah.
kind of two extremes is that? I think to compare with sati is to keep the mind in the kusala side.
Mhm.
And then when in the kusala side, if some kusala qualities is too much, also not good, is that correct?
Yeah.
So that's why this Macchataka comes into being. But to my understanding, any kind of kusala is good, whatever level. So can I understand this Cetasika is like a kind of buffer zone?
As what? I cannot hear you. As
Buffer,
huh?
buffer zone.
Can you, Dr. Ryan, can you repeat? I cannot hear her.
Yeah, it's a buffer zone, Bhante.
Buffer zone. Yes, exactly. You're right. That's a very, very good and it's also a sharp question. So thank you for raising that actually. So this, if we take the mental cluster, right? So these are the extremes. For example, if we draw that these are extremes like restlessness. Then we have sleepiness, drowsiness or laziness, we can call. Right? So what the Tatra Majjhatata is doing, so when these are the extremes, at that level, the mind is already akusala. Before going into that, there are like tendencies towards these sides. Tendencies towards these sides. Right? Still the mind is wholesome. But when now the mind is tending to go towards this. So we have to explain it in 3 stages. For example, the words doesn't come into my mind directly. Yeah. Yeah. I'll use the other one, right? It's the other 2 extremes which are easy to understand. Arati, Atipahatta, right? One example is Atipahatta, too much excited. Then boredom. These are 2 extremes, right? So why this too much excitement and too much boredom? Excitement, too much boredom happens. We have within the mind, we have Atipahattata, Atilokata. These 2 levels we call Atipahatta. You can use the English terms. Right. Overly happy. Then cause. Right. So the mind in the wholesome level comes into the happiness, increases. The equilibrium is broken. The balance is broken. Then what happens after few moments? It falls into the unwholesome, akusala. Then the mind is cross. It's not having the pleasure in it, so it falls into boredom, akusala. So what happens? This Tatra Majjhatata doesn't let the mind to go into these extreme levels and it maintains. If the Tatra Majjhatata is weaker, the mind gets overly happy, but it's still in the Kusala moment. It's getting the balance is being broken. Then what happens after a few moments? It falls into the Lobha. And sometimes it gets engrossed, but still we are focusing well. We are in the mindfulness. So the mind is losing its balance in this happiness and understand some kind of understanding, right? Better to say not understanding, like a certain balance. So then if it gets more and more dry, what happens? In the end, it falls into the border. So this tatra majjatata maintains the mind not to go into these two extremes within the wholesome mind. So that is called tatra majja. This can be seen when our mindfulness meditation grows into a higher level in the bojjhanga. That Upekka Sambojjhanga plays a huge role in maintaining this balance. So I hope you got an answer for this.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Bhante. Maybe next time we have another question, because I in fact have a question based on your explanation, but it's time now, so we do it next time, Bhante.
Okay, so thank you for listening. Thanks for joining. So we hope could understand, have a better picture on the Chitta Cetasika. So hope to see you next time. And may this kusala help to prolong the Buddha Sasana for a longer period. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Buddha Sasanang Chirantikthatu. Buddha Sasanang Chirantikthatu. Buddha Sasanang Chirantikthatu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.